housekeeping items, just some announcements before we get started. First of all of your lines have been muted, so feel free to multitask while you listen to the presentation. If you have a question, and I'm sure you all do, for our guests, please go ahead and put that into the question window on your screen, and we will get to that throughout the chat. My name is Cat Koehler, and I am the social media advocate here at Home Instead Senior Care. So I have the wonderful opportunity to interact with all kinds of family caregivers, whether they're dealing with dementia or another condition or just simple old age with their loved ones. And so I talk with you during these live chats and on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Today I'm really excited to invite Dr. Amy to our chat. Amy is an expert in aging, retirement, and caregiving, and she's a frequent guest on radio and television programs in both Canada and the US. Amy has authored 2 books on caregiving and friendship and has authored numerous articles for various media publications. She's a highly sought after trainer and speaker throughout North America, and really one of the people I go to when I need some real life practical tips on caregiving. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kat. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today we're talking about managing the unexpected, and I think that's an apt expression for really all of caregiving. So much of it is unexpected.
That's absolutely true, Kat. I just want to say that very few of us know we're going to become caregivers before we actually are caregivers.
And so many of us are caregiving, and it really surprises me how many people don't think of themselves as a caregiver.
That's a very common thing. You know, what you hear people say all the time is, well, I'm just being a good spouse or a good adult child, or, you know, I just love my mom, or, you know, that they see themselves in that role, and they don't recognize that what they're doing is actually caregiving. And the importance of recognizing that, I think, Kat, is that oftentimes people need more support than they realize they need. And that support may be practical, or it may be emotional support, it could be financial support. And people may not be availing themselves of the support that they need and the resources that are out there if they don't see that what they're doing really is caregiving.
Very true. There's a vast difference in the resources you will find if you search for support for a daughter versus support for a caregiver, right?
Absolutely. And you know, I think what it does is it recognizes the importance of the role. It's just like being a parent. You know, we feel very good about saying I'm a parent. This is a similar sort of thing, just, you know, obviously dealing with the generation usually that came before us, but then ultimately with our own generation, our spouses and our friends and our siblings. So there's a benefit to recognizing that we're a caregiver. And one of the definitions, Kat, I like to use of caregiving is the idea that anything that you're doing that supports the independence or quality of life of an older adult is caregiving. And that really runs the gamut from, you know, the person who every day, the neighbor who comes over and brings the mail and says hi, to the adult child who's long distance and calling on a regular basis to make sure that their parent is still connected and has support. And then, of course, all the things we think about with personal care and having to help with household tasks and all of those type of things.
How true. Gosh, how many times have I heard, well, I'm not really the caregiver because I live so far away. So, I mean, I'll send checks, but really it's, you know, my brother or, you know, my niece who's doing it.
And that's right. You know, and this is really different, isn't it? Because we're saying it's so much broader than that. And I think what you just said, Kat, I love is because it recognizes that caregiving is a family thing. And even though there may be one person who's picking up the main part of it, it impacts everybody in the family.
It really does. Hey, Amy, let's jump into our first question. And
great.
we got this question emailed into us, and for those of you listening, if you ever want to email us a question, really encourage you to do so. We share them on the chats, we share them in our emails, and I try to respond to as many as I can. And the email address is livechat@homeinstead.com. And this email, Amy, came from Claire. Here's her email. My stepmom is experiencing extreme forgetfulness and insists on driving. I haven't allowed her, but this seems to be a sticking point for her. How can I deal with it? New Jersey has suspended her privileges from a doctor-driven letter she sent, but she has a Florida license because she splits her time between the two states. It's the driving question that's a big marker of independence. That's a hard one.
That's exactly right, Kat. I'm glad you said that, because I think there are so many aspects to this. Let's first say that the number one issue here is safety. And that's always the number one issue that we have to step back and look at. And this is safety both for Claire's stepmom and also for other people out in the road. The fact that she has extreme forgetfulness and that a doctor has said that she can no longer drive and New Jersey has suspended her license, these are serious issues. So there are several things that I think, Claire, you could do. One of the things, first of all, you probably have already done this, but in case you haven't, can you explore what the law is in Florida, and if there's anything that you could do that might potentially impact or revoke her license in Florida? So that since it seems to me what you're saying, Claire, is that your stepmom is using that license as the fact that she still can drive. So that would be one thing I'd explore. The other thing I would say is that this is one of those situations that if you think about that safety is the real key here, you somewhat have to do whatever it takes to stop this situation. And you want to consider things. Sometimes people have to move a car or disable the ignition or do something. Now, when doing that, then there's the other part that Kat just talked about. So there's a practical and a safety issue, and then there's an emotional issue here. You have to know that you're not going to get your stepmom to understand this. She's not going to understand that she can't drive, because usually people don't understand that. They will never agree to, you're right, I no longer can do this. So trying to convince her logically about why the fact that New Jersey took your license away and if Florida ended up doing it, now you can't drive, is likely not to work. So it's a discussion you don't want to spend too much time on and trying to get your mother to see the merits of not driving, or your stepmother. However, being empathic about the fact that this is a big blow to her independence is really key. And just being able to say, I know, Mom, how hard it is not to drive anymore. I can't even imagine if I had to give it up, how I would feel. Put yourself if somebody took your keys away right now. And just because your stepmom has dementia doesn't mean that she suddenly feels good about this. No one typically feels good about losing their license. So I think responding to the emotional, dealing with the practical, and then the third part is I would really encourage you to think about making sure that there are alternatives for her to get around. So that doesn't take away, even if I have to say my dad had great alternatives to driving. My father did not have dementia, but he lives in a community where once he realized he had to stop driving, there was fabulous transportation, and he still really missed driving. So the fact that you're going to come up with alternatives isn't going to necessarily make her feel better, but you want to make sure you take care of the practical need for her to get around in a comfortable manner. So dealing with, again, safety is number one, and then the practical way of how are you going to stop this from occurring and making sure you do that. Then the third part of recognizing and acknowledging and validating her feelings, and then dealing with the practical part of how she's going to get around town. And then also for yourself, and I'll probably say this at every question, caregiving can be stressful and exhausting. So making sure you get support while you're doing this with your stepmom.
That's absolutely great advice. And one thing I would recommend is, I'm glad you brought up making sure that you have a plan for alternative transportation. And I would recommend having some things lined up so that it's ready to go when Claire, you decide to, make that cutoff, however you handle that, whether it's, getting rid of the car, disabling it, but have that ready so she doesn't have that worry.
That's right.
And again, like you said, Amy, having alternatives isn't going to cure the emotional hardship of this for Claire's
That's
stepmom.
right.
So, making sure that she has ample opportunity to have, to get out of the house and go to things that she wants to do without feeling like a burden on somebody. So, you may even want to look into, we used to say this to my grandma all the time, Grandma, we'll take you wherever you want to go. But she always thought that would be a burden on us. And so we found out that if we hired somebody to do it, well, this person's being paid. It's not a burden. So that was a much better solution for her than having her family drive her.
Absolutely. And, it also, Kat, I think just brings up the question, too, of where Claire's stepmom is living, and is that a safe environment? If she's still driving, it makes me wonder if she's living independently or not. And that, so hand in hand with the driving, is it maybe time to take a look at the living situation, too?
Yeah, Amy, you've said, you have a saying that you've said a few times about the top two priorities. I'll butcher the saying, but the top two priorities are they safe and do they have a good quality of life? Everything else is great. Is that right?
Right. I think are they safe? Yeah. Well, I actually say, are they safe? Are basic needs being met? So make sure somebody's right. And then you want to look at some quality of life things. And so, I immediately go to safety, and then I look at basic needs being met. And so that starts to make me think about housing and is, she's safe around the way food is being prepared if she's living alone. So just keeping an eye on it. Kat, we know that one thing that happens in families, it's hard to monitor the progression of Alzheimer's disease if you're just popping in and out, because oftentimes people rise to their best when someone comes to visit. And so we may not see the extent of the limitations from Alzheimer's disease or other dementias if we're just in and out. So we have to be quite aware of making sure we're watching that the progression isn't putting the person in either an unsafe situation or a situation where they're not able to attend to their needs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I hope that helps you, Claire. And I want to move on now, Amy, to a question that we had come in live from Cindy. And it's a bit of a two-part question here. So here's her question. My mother was recently diagnosed. She's in her mid-60s. She feels and believes that she has, quote, short-term memory loss only, unquote. I do not see the need to tell her otherwise, nor does my dad, her caregiver. Is this advised? Also, how do we handle telling her siblings, who I feel would try to tell her? I feel they shouldn't know her status, but I don't want them to undermine our care of her. It would be very upsetting to my mom and life with Dad.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and Kat, I just want to correct that. I think she said she feels they should know her status, the siblings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So it sounds
two parts here.
I'm trying to understand. It sounds like the mother received a diagnosis, but perhaps mom didn't hear the diagnosis or doesn't understand or recall.
Sure.
And so they don't want mom to know that she's been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's. Is that what you're getting from this?
Yes, yeah, I think that's the case. That her belief is she just has some short-term memory loss. And, this is one of those situations, again, that they're not going to be able to convince her mom that is different. That's what somebody said to me once about dementia. They said that they work with a lot of families, and they always tell the family that think about the person you love, that their brain is somewhat broken now, right? That there are changes in their brain that make it impossible for them to be able to process information like we process information and to retain information. And in turn, those changes in the brain then impact people's behavior. and their ability to take care of themselves. So if you think about that, I'm a big advocate of honesty, but you have to ask yourself the purpose of the honesty, because in this case, there is not, the mom's not going to be able to retain this. And so by simply telling her that she has dementia, you might have to tell her every day that she has dementia, right? So she's clearly been told that, and I'm assuming by the doctor, and what her ability to process is that it's short-term memory loss. So I don't see any benefit in telling her that she has dementia. It's not going to change anything, and it will not accomplish
It's really going to
anything.
cause, the same conversation to happen over and over again. And it's going to result in frustration, I think, for you, Cindy, and your dad, and mom. I think you're right on there, Amy.
And, I actually did an article a couple of years ago for Huffington Post on this idea of when we do what we call therapeutic fibbing, and this is what this is about. And we never want to rob someone of their human experience. So let's say her mom, instead of seeing this, her mom had someone very close to her die. And sometimes people will say, well, should we tell the person that the person died? And the answer is yes, because the mother might get upset and grieve and go through all of that. Those are normal human emotions. But you don't have to keep re-injuring somebody by telling them something like this. So I agree with that part, not telling her. Now, the other part's a little trickier, isn't it, Kat, because it's about her siblings. And she feels they should know her status. So what comes to me, and I think you're right. I think you're probably gonna need to tell the siblings, Cindy. But here's what I think would be helpful. Instead of just telling them, I think is educating them. That if you can educate them a bit about, there's various ways to do this. One way might be to get, if she's been diagnosed, they may have actually given you some materials, some handouts or brochures or something that you can use to explain your mom's condition and what the prognosis is and why it doesn't make sense to tell her about this, okay? The other way is, and we'll reference this quite a bit, Home Instead has a wonderful site, which is the helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. There's some great educational material on the site, and you might want to peruse that and see if there's something that would be worth sharing that would be helpful. The Alzheimer's Association also has great things that might help you, but I wouldn't just, if you will, drop the news on them without also doing some educating so that they understand and making sure they have resources. Because remember, this is their sister, so they're going to have emotional responses to this too, right? I mean, Kat, I know I would if I found out my sister had Alzheimer's. So you want to educate them.
And you have to be prepared to honor those emotions, or maybe even lack thereof.
That's right.
Just like you said earlier, that's a human emotion, and there's no right way or wrong way to in a way, it's and as those of you who care for a loved one with Alzheimer's, it's a grieving process while they're still with us.
Absolutely.
So Cindy, prepare yourself for their emotions when they hear the news.
Well said, Kat. I think that, and having some resources for them, and understanding that in the moment they may not be able to absorb those resources. That's why if you can give them things that are either takeaways or things they can look at later, because there's going to be a lot for them to deal with in the moment.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to touch on here, as Cindy mentioned, that she doesn't want the siblings to undermine the care that mom is receiving. And know that we absolutely want families and friends to be educated on the disease. So know that they may come to you with suggestions, recommendations, and I think, for the most part, those come from a really sincere place. And if it's not something that you want to take up, I mean, really a good way to handle that is just to smile and say thank you so much for thinking of her, and we'll absolutely, consider that as part of her care. That doesn't mean you have to do it.
Right. Right. And I think the other thing that you're bringing up, Kat, that's a really good point about families working together is it might be a good idea for you and your dad to kind of talk about how the care is going to go so that that can be presented to the siblings as well, and think about, is there a role for them if you think they would want a role that you can talk to them about, or ask them would they like to be involved, but make it very clear about how decisions are going to be made with your dad as the one in control.
That's a great idea. In fact, it might be, it might be a good idea, Cindy, for you to sit down with your dad. It looks like you sent us a note here that you have some concerns, that you and dad have different ideas of what maybe mom's care plan should look like. So I don't know, Amy, if you know of some resources that can help families that struggle with that, or some tips or advice on what do you do when two people very close to the person who needs care don't agree on what that care plan looks like.
Well, often what needs to happen is there needs to be a family conversation, and there needs to be someone who can help facilitate that conversation. It's often hard to do in our families. So thinking about, someone who can come in and help facilitate that is really, really important, because it's not unusual for people to have that.
Right. I like the idea of bringing somebody in to facilitate that, because if we're trying to do it ourselves, we've got all the emotion that goes along with it. So, if you belong to a church or a synagogue, perhaps there's somebody that you trust in that community. Are there aging professionals that deal with this kind of situation, Amy, that you're aware of?
Well, there are actually, the Essential Conversations Project. That's what that we're doing, is providing facilitators to help families with these conversations. So we train facilitators that help guide families through these difficult conversations. So it's a huge need, and that's the reason that we started doing this, because we recognize the struggle that families had in doing it. So I hear stories every day about families struggling with this. And, if we could get people to sit down and plan and have these conversations early, like you're talking about, it really leads to more harmony throughout the caregiving process.
Yeah, it does. And Cindy, I'd also, I'm not sure, you don't mention how far along in the process your mom is, but if she is still capable of helping with those decisions, I really encourage you to include her. And that's really one of the reasons, we push for early diagnosis, is so that the person can be involved in their care decisions.
I'm so glad you said that, Kat. A lot of times people will think because someone has dementia that they can't participate in decision making. And I think we have to remember that people's abilities come and go during dementia. So especially in the early stages, people can have very lucid periods of time. And we have to always remember to make sure that the person with dementia is really at the center of the conversation, and when they're no longer able to participate fully, at the center in a heart sort of way, as well as a thinking way about how would this person approach it. Because, again, I always come back to, we need to put ourselves in these situations. Imagine yourself and what you would want, right? We'd want to make sure that our voice always got heard. That's key.
Great. Hey, and that kind of leads us into Annie's question. And here's Annie's husband was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment 2 years ago.
Okay.
She's wondering if that means he'll eventually end up developing Alzheimer's. And then she's also wondering that if he does, if Alzheimer's or dementia is in his future, should she start looking for a place for his care for the time when she's maybe not able to care for him? She doesn't have any family members around that she can count on to help.
Okay. So I'm actually on the Alzheimer's Association website right now, and I want to just read this paragraph because I think this will be helpful. And there are many people who I'm sure are listening who are not familiar with mild cognitive impairment or MCI.
Yes.
So mild cognitive impairment causes cognitive changes that are serious enough to be noticed by the individuals experiencing them or to other people, but the changes are not severe enough to interfere with daily life or independent function. Because the changes caused by MCI are not severe enough to affect daily life, a person with MCI does not meet the diagnostic guidelines for dementia. So that means they don't have dementia. They have something lesser than that. And, however, those with MCI have an increased risk of eventually developing Alzheimer's or some other type of dementia. However, not all people with MCI get worse, and some eventually get better. So to answer the question, him having MCI does not mean that he's necessarily going to develop Alzheimer's disease. He's at an increased risk, but as you heard, some people actually don't get worse and actually get better. So that's the best answer that I can give you on that, because it comes right from the Alzheimer's Association. However, let's talk about the other half of it. If you find that he is developing the disease, should you look for a place for his care for the time when you may not be able to care for him? I'd really encourage you to this is I love that you're thinking ahead. That's fabulous. And the other thing I would say is you want to make plans without jumping too far ahead. As Kat will certainly talk about, Home Instead Senior Care, is a home care company that really helps keep a lot of people at home who have dementia, at least, especially during the early and mid stage, right, Kat? I mean, you have lots of clients who have that. And there are other home care companies that do that, and there are options beyond having to quickly place him. Now, the idea of if you start to see that he is developing Alzheimer's disease and you can see that where the course is going, it's wonderful to do what you're talking about and start exploring places so that you know that he's going to get the care that he needs when he needs it for that time. I don't know how old you are, but this is the other thought. You say that you can't count on any other family members and you may not be able to care for him. So I encourage people to think about their own future, and even if you never need care, but just the idea about how do you want to age. I ask people this question all the time. So do you want to age at home? Well, then make sure you start putting things in place so that you can do that, even making modifications to your home that are simple, like we think about grab bars, or we think about looking at the room to make sure there's room enough for if perhaps you might need some sort of an assistive walking device or something that you could get around. And also making sure, just thinking ahead, because the more we can plan for our own aging, the more likely we are to be in control. So your question is a fabulous one, Annie. Yeah. And yes, I would say doing planning, if it does end up that your husband develops Alzheimer's disease, is a fabulous thing to do, and we would all do well to do a little bit more planning, just knowing that we're all going to get older and we may not know what conditions we may have, but I always call it having the plan B. If something happens, that you have something that you can do.
Absolutely. And Annie, I think you're in a good spot to start creating those plans with your husband if he's able to, and it sounds like he should be able to help you, for him and for yourself. And Amy, you're so right. We get so caught up in as caregivers of I have to care for somebody else, and we forget all about ourselves. And someday we're going to be the person who needs care. And how do we want to be cared for?
And talk to people about it. I'm big on having conversations as early as possible with the people you love about what's quality of life for you, what feels like home for you, all of those things. I walk around your current home and ask yourself, what makes home feel like home to me? Is it this structure? Is it the neighborhood I live in? Is it the amenities that are nearby? So all of those types of things put us in more control of our futures too.
Yeah, and Amy, I'll even take it a step further. Talking about it, talk about it a lot.
Absolutely.
To your friends, your family, your neighbors, it doesn't have to be a formal sit down, this is what I want, but, just in conversation. But write it down. Write down what you want. And then it's not just once and done. Revisit that plan of what you want and how you want to age every few years, because our ideas of what's important to us and what we want change as life happens. So it's not a once and done. Make sure that that's something that you revisit and update.
Fabulous. I love that, and I love the revisiting and updating.
Well, which, thank goodness we revisit and update things, because I had some really bad leg warmers back in the 80s. So. Okay.
And so, and imagine having bad care plans that last for 30 years.
Right. I want to invite everyone who has joined us online to take a poll. As part of our mission to bring great resources to family caregivers, we always like to get your input on things. So today we're asking you, what kind of help do you have in your caregiving situation? No help? You're the only one? Family members help you? Perhaps you have friends who help you? Volunteers? Or perhaps you have a paid professional caregiver that comes in and helps. So we'll give you a couple minutes here to take the poll. And while you're doing that, I want to bring up another great resource for all of our Alzheimer's or other dementia caregivers. And that is the two-part resource. It's the book Confidence to Care by Molly Carpenter. It's a great book that offers really great practical advice. Each chapter is done by a certain, behavioral symptom that you may be struggling with, whether it's repetition or it's wandering. So in each chapter starts with a story from a family caregiver, and then it gives you some different approaches to help you manage that. And if you have a smartphone or a tablet, there's also an app that goes along with Confidence to Care that you can download on the Google Play Store or for your iPhone. So we invite you to check those out, and you'll be getting a follow-up email after our live chat today that includes links to different resources, including those. Okay, so thank you.
I just want to say, if I can, Kat, those resources are fabulous, and they are so well organized. They're easy to use, and they're so practical because you don't have to read a whole book. You can just look up what you need very quickly.
Yeah, I love the way that Molly divided it. I mean, each chapter is a different behavior. So if, one day you're having an issue with aggression and anger, you don't have to go through snippets of 4 different chapters. You go straight to that chapter. It's a real quick, easy read. On the app, you can go and just hit aggression and anger, see tips from other caregivers. So it's both of them are great tools.
Absolutely.
Okay, if you are just joining us, this is our Alzheimer's live chat, and today we are talking with Dr. Amy D'Aprix. She's an expert in aging, retirement, and caregiving. And I just really have always enjoyed your practical, real-life tips, Amy. They're, I think a lot of times as caregivers, we hear tips and advice, and we think, yeah, right, in what world do you live in? So thanks for bringing us some real-life, usable tips. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for that. And part of that came from the 10 years I spent caring for my own parents. And, as I always tell people, I had over 15 years of professional experience when I became a family caregiver, and it was still incredibly difficult, and it made me very committed to trying to make the journey easier for caregivers.
Well, we appreciate it. I want to kick off this half hour with a a question that we received in our email box. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, you can always email us your questions or your comments. And I read all of them, and I try to respond to as many as I can. The email is livechat@homeinstead.com. Amy, this question is from Rita, and here it is. I drive back and forth daily to care for my mom. She has hired help most evenings. Approximately 2 to 3 times a week, my 79-year-old mom, who suffers from Alzheimer's, insists that she wants to see her parents, both of whom passed away many years ago. Once, she had such a sense of urgency and helplessness that she began to cry. My mom has always been very strong, able, and independent, that it really concerned me for her sake. It's heartbreaking, especially when my efforts in comforting her and redirecting her don't always work. I do my best with playing along and say things like, I wish I could take her, but that I don't know how to get to their house. She'll say, oh, yes, you do. Or I'll say, we'll drive there tomorrow because right now it's nighttime. I try to get creative with my answers, but what specifically would be the best way to deal with, or what should I say, in this situation?
Well, first, Rita, I want to tell you that I think you're doing a fabulous job, because intuitively you've done a technique, redirection, that often works well. So you're already doing great, and I know you're frustrated because it's not always working, and that's why sometimes we need kind of 2 or 3 things in our toolkit, if you will, so that we're not only relying on one thing. So redirection often works very, very well. You might try a couple of other things, and you've said you've gotten creative, so you may have already done a couple of these things. You mentioned telling that you know how to get to the house, or that kind of thing. The other, or it's nighttime, you can't go. You might say that they're away, and that's why you can't go. They're on vacation, so you might try taking it from the other standpoint. These are all just other redirection things I'm saying right now. The other thing that sometimes works is to get people talking about memories they have about that person, or if you have memories of your grandparents, talking about your memories, like, oh, here's something I remember about Grandma that I just always loved about her, and trying to move the conversation that way. Now, this may not work, okay, because sometimes, and this is a very common problem, that people want to see their parents or someone who's died. So another thing that you might want to do is combine the redirection with removing your mom from the situation to do something else. So let's say she starts getting agitated about this and wanting to go to see her parents. Perhaps what you can do is very, and staying calm and being light helps this, of course, but just answer her as best as you can in the ways that you're doing, or try some of these other kind of new ways to do this. And then try saying something like, Mom, how about a snack? Will you come out and help me make a snack? And getting her into an activity, another room, often leaving a room and going somewhere and doing something that's enjoyable, whether it's eating, or let's come help me, I want to watch this television show, or needing her help to do something. All of those things might be helpful. So being subtle in what you're saying helps in the answer. Changing the conversation and taking her somewhere else might be helpful in this. Kat, do you have other things you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate changing the environment. It's really amazing how much our environment impacts us. And not just, those with dementia or Alzheimer's, but all of us. Think about, the color that you hate the most and how you feel when you're in a room painted that color. For me, it's yellow. I can't handle yellow paint for some reason. And it makes me grumpy. It literally gives me a headache. So, I know that if I'm out of an environment that bothers me, or if I change my environment, that it changes my mood. And I know with my grandmother, simply getting up and, going for a walk. She lived in a community, so we'd go, walk the halls and talk, was an instant, mood lifter for her. So activity, change of environment, I think those are great tips. Amy, we got an email talking about vacation. Somebody has a question about taking their loved one on vacation. And I want to touch on this one now because I think our listeners may have some tips that they can also send in
Great
in the
idea.
next few minutes. So here's the email. I'm going to sum it up here real quick. And this comes from Steve in the UK. So Steve is living in the UK, and he has a father who's 83 years old suffering with Alzheimer's. They have a caregiver who attends to him every day, but it's Steve and his wife's responsibility, as family caregivers to make sure the everyday needs like paying bills, food, utilities, things like that are all taken care of. This summer, Steve and his wife have hired a motorhome and are taking Steve's father on holiday for a week around the south coast of the UK to visit family. And Steve says as the week gets nearer, he's starting to get more and more anxious about it. He's not sure if he's doing the right thing by taking his dad. He says that his father knows who Steve is, but forgets what he's done the day before. So he wants to know, is he doing the right thing by taking his dad on this vacation, and do we have any tips or advice for him?
Well, it is very much possible to travel with someone with dementia. Normally, it's obviously an easier thing to do if it's in the earlier stages of dementia, but it also can be quite stressful. So I think the question's a very good one. There are some really practical things to think about. It sounds to me like, from what you're saying, your dad is in early stages. I mean, I would say
he said 18 to 24 months. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he said, well, one of the things to think about when it's kind of not a good time to travel with somebody, if they're really disoriented a lot and confused and agitated, even when they're in their familiar settings, it's likely that it's going to be significantly worse when they're away. So for others of you listening, you certainly can do travel with someone with dementia, but you want to think about what stage they're in, how they are at home. If they have a lot of paranoid behavior, it may be very difficult to be away. So all of those things are considerations. Now, it sounds to me like this may be just fine. One of the things that's often suggested is kind of a trial run of a short trip, using the same kind of transportation so you kind of see how somebody does with it. That may not be practical because it sounds like they're renting something for the week to go do this. But for others of you, if you're able, for example, if you're going to take a car trip, maybe doing a day trip in that car and seeing how it goes, and can the person tolerate that? And then very practically, I think making sure that you've got important things with you like documents, emergency contact information, doctors' names, in case there's any issue on the road, right? List of medications that are being taken, any allergies, any legal papers you might need. You might want to make sure that your dad has identification with him at all times. I mean, I'm assuming you'll be very attentive to the fact there's the more of a potential of someone wandering off in these kind of circumstances. So you want to make sure that. The other thing is, it sounds like you're going to have a great opportunity to do this, but when you travel with someone with dementia, you really want to make sure you have enough food, enough, so snacks and water and activities and any of that sort of thing. And making sure you're prepared for any sort of an emergency is key, right? So it's more important with someone with dementia because they can't cognitively think about this. So build in flexibility to your plans, is what I would say, so that you can respond to the needs. And make sure that you travel at the time of day that usually morning is a better time for people, or earlier day. So the more fatigued someone with dementia gets, often the harder it is for them. Not leaving them unsupervised. So again, safety, safety, safety. But little things like just making sure comfortable clothes are being worn and there's enough time for rest breaks and all of that sort of thing are things to think about. So I think watch watch behavior until then, right? And to then make a decision about whether or not you feel comfortable that you could manage if something happened on the road. But I don't hear you saying that your dad has, any symptoms that would be concerning, like the paranoia or the hallucinations, where you'd be concerned they would be made worse, you know, being on the
Yeah,
road.
honestly, it sounds like a great time to make some,
Yes,
see some family and have a great trip with your dad while he can still really enjoy it. And one thing that I would also put in that toolkit is an emergency exit plan. So, Amy, you talked about flexibility. Be flexible enough to say we have to end this and go home.
absolutely.
So include that in your
I'm
plan.
always, Kat, one of the things that helps me sometimes, and I think this is, we have to be careful about this because we never want to infantilize or anybody who has dementia or any older adult, right? They're adults, they need to be treated that way. But if you think about what it's like traveling with a toddler, it can help you because some of the same things that help in traveling with a toddler help in traveling with someone with dementia. So any of you who've been parents who've gone through that, what you just said, Kat, would be absolutely true, wouldn't it? That you'd want to make sure that if something got too difficult, that you allowed for the plans to change, right? And a lot of the tips I gave around having snacks and activities and all of that, and again, that's not in any way to infantilize an older adult, but it's recognizing that some of those same needs are there.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great way to look at it. And I want to encourage all of you, if you have tips or advice or a story about traveling with somebody who has Alzheimer's or another dementia, will you please email those to me at livechat@homeinstead.com, and we'll see if we can't put together a good tip list in one of our emails coming up to get you all ready for any trips you may have this summer. Okay.
Great idea.
Amy, we've got one question here that I want to tackle before we take on, give out some resources and maybe do one more final question. But it's a question about living will. Can you talk to us about what is a living will and how does that protect the patient and how does that impact family? Can you give us a little knowledge there?
Kat, I'm hesitant to go too deep in this because I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to say.
And you don't play one on live chat.
And I don't play one on live chat either, no. And the other thing is a lot of living will situations are different state by state, so that makes me just a little uncomfortable to go too deep. But I think what we can talk about are some general things. We talk about living wills and other advanced directives, and what that means is, you're doing something in advance, you're making directives. And what those are they're written legal instructions, and this is important about your preferences for what you want for medical care if you're not able to make decisions for yourself, right? So that's what we're talking about. And I think that the importance of this cannot be underestimated. I mean, we just have to say over and over, we need people to be doing this ahead of time. Because what it means is that you're likely to get the care you want and also to avoid unnecessary care that you don't want. Many people don't want certain procedures done. My mother was fabulous about this, and I tell this story a lot because it was so useful. That my mother had a massive stroke when she was 69, very young. And my mom lost her ability to speak and a lot of cognitive ability in that stroke. But if you go back about probably 6 years before that stroke, my mom and I were together once in the car, and she talked to me about what she wanted if ever she needed to be on life supports. Oh. And at the time, it seemed so, remote that we would ever need to do this. And then 8 years my mother lived after that stroke, and in the last month of my mom's life, we had my mom in hospice care, and it was my dad and my two sisters and me, and we were talking to the hospice worker, and they were offering us an option of putting in a feeding tube. Well, my mother had been very clear with me and with everyone in the family about what it was she wanted, what quality of life was for her, and what she didn't want. And often this is based not on specific treatments, but on values and about what quality of life feels like. And
Right.
so because she did that, we all could hear her voice in our head. So besides having a written document, we could hear what she wanted. And we felt great peace of mind about that. And my mother would have absolutely not wanted that feeding tube. And so I think it's important to say, that's the thing to recognize. It's not that you have to go through a checklist if I want this, want that. It's even more important to talk about what you value and quality of life. And it's also important to say that this isn't just an exercise for old people.
No.
Any of us over the age of 18 really need to be doing these sort of living wills and making sure that we have put our wishes in writing and told people what we want so that they can carry out our wishes.
Absolutely. And so I encourage you, as Amy said, probate is not a federal law. It's different state by state. So I encourage you to go online or check with local resources on what your state mandates are, what forms you need, and all of that. But definitely
Kat, can I add
everybody
one thing
needs one.
to this?
Please.
I just want to add one thing, which is that I didn't mention as part of a living will, we often, people name someone, and it's called a different thing in different states. So, it can be a healthcare agent or proxy or healthcare representative. There's a bunch of names depending on what state you're in. But that person is somebody we designate to make decisions for us when we can't. So that's also part of this process.
Great. Okay, I want to talk about some of the resources that we've mentioned throughout the chat. I want to make sure we get these in before we run out of time. And then if we have a chance, there's one more question that I want to talk about. But some of the resources that you've heard us speak about are, we've got our website, helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. As Amy mentioned, lots of resources there. You can ask questions. You can get support. You can do some training to maybe learn some new techniques to help you as a family caregiver. So Confidence to Care is the book that I mentioned by Molly Carpenter. So confidencetocare.com is where you can learn more about that. And of course, our Facebook page. Amy, we now have more than 260,000 people in our Facebook community on facebook.com/rememberforalzheimers. So if you're looking, for some information, some inspiration, or just want to connect with others who are in the same situation, make sure you come over and like us and join us there. And then let's talk real quick so you all can mark your calendars for our chat next month. We're going to be talking about tips and advice for some of these difficult behaviors. And we're going to talk about one of these difficult behaviors here coming up in just a second. I'm really excited to invite back to our chat David Troxel. He is the co-author of The Best Friends Approach to Alzheimer's Care, and is really one of the go-to minds in Alzheimer's and memory care. So we're really excited to have him join us Tuesday, April 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern. So you can register for that.
He's fabulous.
He is.
I just want to say, Kat, he's fabulous. Anybody who are on, definitely come listen to David. He's just great, and he is filled with wisdom.
He is. It's fast hour with him. Register for that chat just like you did this one over at helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. And if you have questions on Alzheimer's that you want to ask David, you can send them to us at livechat@homeinstead.com ahead of time. Okay, real quick, Amy, speaking of those difficult behaviors that we see, I've got a question here that was actually on our Facebook page, our Remember for Alzheimer's Facebook page, and it comes from Karen. Karen says, my mom has put her jewelry somewhere and we cannot find it. She is sure that I stole it and am just lying to her. Her verbal attacks are vicious and I can't take much more. How do I deal with this?
Well, this is a common situation, and again, a couple of parts to this. So, Karen, we want to look at how do you deal with your mom, and then I really want to encourage you to get support. And
Yes.
support from either a caregiver support group, which I would highly recommend. If you contact your Alzheimer's Association, they run support groups in almost every community. So you need some support because this is a tough situation to be going through. So remembering that your mom can't think clearly, and it's so hard not to personalize this when somebody we love, who we've had a lifelong relationship with, is now saying terrible things to us. It's hard not to take it personally. That's why we need the support. But some techniques for dealing with that. Apologizing and taking the blame often helps. And I know that sounds crazy. You may say, well, why would I apologize when I didn't do anything wrong? But you can say, I'm so sorry we can't find this, Mom, and I'm sorry that it's been lost, and I bet we can figure this out together. Try to be reassuring, try to stay calm. I read one woman said to her mother, Mom, no one in our family would ever steal anything from you. And somehow that actually helped her mom a little bit. So,
Wow.
Again, you have to try different techniques because that may not work at all. That may just agitate someone and say, well, I know you stole it, so don't tell me you didn't steal it. So, but taking the blame and doing some redirection and just recognizing that this is not a personal attack. The other thing I would say is assuming you can find this, you might want to think about putting it in a safe place and even something that's a locked place because your mom is likely to continue to move it. I mean, there are funny stories about people losing their dentures over and over again, and they end up underneath the couch cushion and all, and it becomes a game of looking for these things. The other thing when someone is losing things like this now and becoming agitated, make sure for things that you can do it with, make copies of them like keys so you can do that, having an extra pair of glasses in case somebody loses that, all those kind of things that you can manage, try to manage to take some of the stress away on the practical side. But not trying to correct your mom, tell her you didn't steal it, nobody, getting angry, none of that will work. So staying as calm as you can and saying, I'm so sorry, let's look for it together, maybe the best you can do.
Yep, that's a tough one. That's really tough when it's something like jewelry. One of the recommendations that we've heard before is, Amy, I love put it somewhere that's locked. Maybe it's a safe you have in the house.
Right.
And maybe you find some costume jewelry that mimics some of her favorite pieces.
That's a great idea. I actually haven't heard that, and that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah. So that is going to conclude our chat for today, Amy. It was a really quick hour.
Yeah, what great questions, too.
Thank you all for joining us. Email me anytime with your questions, your comments at livechat@homeinstead.com. I love hearing from you. Amy, thank you so much for joining us. And don't forget, if you have a chance, please be sure to register for April's live chat. Otherwise, we will see you online. Thanks, everybody.